expect to see on this piece of property, and there's a lot of things that don't conform. And Brad gave me these drawings that you just saw last time, and I'm looking at it going, well, this doesn't look too much like an intermodal center to me, or a multimodal. It looks like a bus station. So I know that this board really hadn't seen the conceptuals yet, but I think that we all expect to see a multimodal center here. I think the Washington expects to see a multimodal center. So my question to Abhishek was going to be today, what is your term of, how do you describe an intermodal center? Now, he kind of did a little bit here with the drawings that I've seen, maybe a little more than I've seen, where you have the bike area and you got the customer waiting room. But I think one of the things that Clearwater wants to see is some type of activity center here, because this is the gateway to our downtown. This lot, this particular place, is the gateway, and so we want to see more than a bus station there. And I know you're doing art and you're doing some landscaping at the corner, but really what the city would like to see is kind of what this conceptual shows, is some activity, meaning retail restaurant, something additional to just, and that's required on everything we do downtown. I mean, even the parking garage, the city's building, across from the park, we're putting retail restaurant down on the first floor and then parking above it, because that's one of the things that the development code requires. So one of the things that I've been trying to put forward to Brad and Abhishek is, I know this isn't a perfect block because there's a building still there. It's a botanical spa that's on the corner, and the lady, I think you all went in and talked to her a couple of years ago, and she said, nah, she didn't really want to sell, but I was hoping they would go in now and maybe show her the conceptuals and say, maybe we could work something out where we could put you into this activity center, and then they could move, they could have more area to do some of these things that I expect to see in a multimodal center. Now, today I brought Michael Delk, our assistant city manager, and we're going to have a meeting after today to try to go through some of this and see if we can get a little closer. Let me just tell you, City of Clearwater really wants to see this happen, but we want to see it happen in a way that it reflects what the true meaning of it was from the beginning. We don't want to see a transfer station move from one block to another. We want to see something more than that. So if you're asking if the City of Clearwater doesn't want this, I can tell you no, we do. We'd like to see that here. We think it'd be, but we want to make sure it's as described to us in the beginning, and I'm sure the board wants the same thing. So that's what we're going to try to work out today.
The only thing I would just add is that this, I would agree with your sentiment on what you just described. The proposed new agreement in the extension, now it's clear that the Clearwater City Council is going to have to vote ultimately on sort of the design elements, or at least that the city's comments and concerns were responded to in some way. In the original agreement, that was not part of the land swap agreement. But now moving forward, because of the comments that Commissioner Albritton made, now the new agreement that we're recommending, this extension to next February, would allow for that. I mean, it's going to happen.
It is. I mean, first we had the environmental issues. Right. Wanted to make sure that everything was on the up and up, because there was some environmental in both places. Mm-hmm. Because this lot is on a railroad track. We had arsenic poisoning. And the other lot before the bus station were there, it was a dry cleaner. So we wanted to make sure as if we were doing a swap, just how could we develop that site? And I think everybody's okay with everything, you know, we've got a plan for that now, so that's all been taken care of. Now we're just kind of down to the nitty-gritty on the points on, you know, exactly how we're gonna make this happen. So I feel confident that we've already, the last meeting we had, we went over some things. I think we got a little bit ahead on it, so Michael and I are gonna have a meeting after this one and see if we can kind of close the gap a little bit, so.
Okay, and I just have one follow-up question. So I do fully understand what you're talking about for a multimodal facility. I'm thinking of Bright Line's transportation hubs. You know, you're catching Bright Line, but it's a coffee shop, it's a place where you can grab a sandwich, you can buy the Bright Line passes, you know, or whatever. So I understand what you're saying, but this is just my question because I'm not sure. So for PSTA, I've not traditionally seen at our bus hubs, other than where you can go and purchase a bus pass or what have you, those elements. So essentially, if we do that, I guess we would be becoming landlords because those persons would lease space from us. And so have you all looked into, so that you can have a conversation encompassing all of that? Have you looked into what it is that we need to do on the PSTA side as it relates to being able to lease the space? You know, who's gonna carry the permits? You know, is it the owner that's going in there? What types of businesses would we like to see based on comments from the residents and city council? Have we kind of even started thinking about that? Because if this is what they're asking for, we should be looking at some type of element. I mean, we have these new coffee shops that are essentially a drive-through, boom, boom, so it's not like you need a big old space. You know, they may have 2, 3 seats inside and seats on the outside, maybe a place where you can get deli sandwiches, ear pods, earbuds. I may have to get a shop down there for that because everybody's always losing their chargers and all that stuff. Hey, I'm thinking about that. So anyway, so any thoughts or?
Yeah, I mean, we've looked at several other case studies from other parts of the country where this is not new. I mean, it's having coffee shop or small restaurants or, you know, deli counters. I've seen them in many transit facilities. So we've looked at those types of models and what are some of the intricacies involved in those models. You know, you have to have space for delivery trucks, you have to have space for people to be able to park their cars, the employees can park if they're not coming on a bus. So those types of things we have looked at, and that's part of the design review that I'd like to do with the city and FDOT to make sure that it's consistent.
Well, let me give you a shameless plug. Greenwood CRA has a very good CRA plan. You may want to, you know, if that moves forward, you may want to touch base with them because they're getting CRA dollars, TIF dollars from the county. A large portion of that is economic development. And if you go past Cleveland, right down, you're in the Greenwood area. So they may have somebody who may be interested in partnering. I don't know. Just throw that out. Thank you, sir.
Other questions? Commissioner Fink Sanders?
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. The first thing came to my mind when Commissioner was speaking is how far away would this new amendment be from the original amendment? Because it seems as though the request that you have should have been the initial conversation, correct? Or what it is that the city of Clearwater is expecting?
Well, that's, yeah, I mean, originally, they submitted, when did you all submit plans? I mean, I know you're not complete, but the 30% to the building department, that's been a while.
Yeah, we've sent 10% design and then 30% design plans, and we've sent those, I want to say since December,
Okay.
November, December. And so we've sent a couple of rounds of design.
Okay, so it wasn't final the first time that this was.
But we're now at 30% design, and what the renderings that are being shown on here are very consistent with the conceptual plans that we sent to the federal government originally to win the grant, and then they were also included in the original land swap agreement with Clearwater as an attachment. We're pretty much following that process. The key now is that we want to make sure that at each stage through the design process, the city and all the stakeholders are going to provide comments. We have to make sure that we respond to those. Yeah.
Okay, so what stage of the process do you anticipate being on mid-February?
What we're proposing is by mid-February, we will have met with the city, probably multiple times, and that the city council will review our proposed project, and approve it, and vote to approve it, to move forward. Then beyond that, we still have to go through the remainder of design, and there will be still more time for city comment, not to revisit prior decisions that were made, but additional comments will still be received and responded to, and then we will start construction next summer.
I mean, the only reason why I ask is that we started in December, and we're at 30%, and we're in October, and you're gonna be complete by February. I'm just trying to see the level of effort that's gonna be placed in this, and if the city of Clearwater is gonna be able to accelerate their decision that quickly. So with that being said, I will move approval for the extension based on the conversation, but I just wanted to ask these questions.
No, second.
Thank you. There's a motion and a second. I did have just a couple of thoughts. One, I know you said that there's an additional potential connection for rail down the road. Have we given any thought to connections for aerial gondolas as well? Because that's also been somewhat of a consideration for potentially up to Clearwater Beach.
Yeah, and we can certainly explore that too, since we still have a fair amount of design to do, so we can look at other modes, connecting and other futuristic modes.
Right. So, and so I appreciate that there's been adaptations to add ride share and some additional bike, because, it's a bus terminal if it's just buses. It's an intermodal center if it's really connecting community members to the next mode of transit.
Right.
They will need some features and services while they're there, but then they're going on to the next phase. And it seems like, I don't know if this is something we can arrange, but maybe a joint workshop with City of Clearwater council members to help move the process along, so we're having all this discussion together. Wants, don't wants, likes, don't likes, let's get them all talked out in a room, and then that way we can go back with a more concrete plan, since both entities are gonna have to approve it separately. And when you do that in the normal process, to Commissioner Fig Sanders' point, it could take much longer than February if we start getting back and forth with details, and our meeting's not for another 3 weeks and that sort of stuff. So that might be an alternative as well. So there was a motion and a second to extend the date till February 29th, 2024. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Excellent. Thank you, Abhishek.
Thank you.
That passes unanimously. We're going to move on to 3C, the Title VI program update. Jacob, I know you're next. The last meeting went long, so
Keep it snappy.
We do have some folks that need to leave by noon, and I know that the information items are going to be something that are very keen importance and maybe a lot of discussion.
All right,
So.
absolutely, I'll keep it fast.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Chair, and good morning, everybody. I'm Jacob Labutka, Planning Manager here at PSDA, and today I'm here to present on the Title VI program update that we have to update every 3 years to ensure our compliance with the Civil Rights Act for the Federal Transit Administration. So today, there's 2 action items. One is to recommend approval of the Title VI program, associated monitoring results, and our major service change policy for submission to FTA. And second is to recommend approval of a service equity analysis of the changes that were service changes that were approved last month. So just kind of a quick overview of Title VI. So essentially, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act says that as an organization that receives federal funds, we of course are should not and cannot discriminate on the basis of race, color, or national origin. So we submit this program update every 3 years to ensure that we are in compliance with that and are distributing our services equitably. So the primary population that we track with that are shown here, minority populations. So if you hear me say Title VI population during this presentation, that is the group I'm referring to. So that specifically refers to communities of color or racial or ethnic groups, pretty much all groups except for non-Hispanic white individuals. We also, two other groups that are also tracked as part of Title VI for monitoring purposes and to make sure our services are deployed equitably. First is low-income households or individuals at 100% of the federal poverty level. Also, the Title VI population comprises about 27% of our county population. Our low-income population is just under 12% of the county population. And we also track those, who are limited English proficient, and that's just about 5% of our county population. So shown here are a few of the monitoring results that we track to make sure that our services are deployed equitably between Title VI populations and the county as a whole. So I will just kind of point out two on here. So one that we track is making sure that our on-time performance is similar between routes that significantly serve Title VI populations and the system as a whole. And our on-time performance is pretty similar between Title VI routes and the community as a whole. We also track how we deploy amenities. So there are about 2,019 shelters and benches. This does include the advertising benches in Pinellas County, and just under half of those are in Title VI areas, which is slightly more than would be expected given the distribution of Title VI populations in our county. So something else that we have to do is update our major service change policy. So we do a major service change. Major service change is any change that affects more than 25% of a route miles or hours. And when that is done, we have to conduct a service equity analysis to make sure that the changes do not create any disproportionate impacts. So we look at two things. First, we look at disparate impacts to ensure, so that's any difference in impacts for Title VI minority communities, plus or minus 10% from the county population. So to give you a quick example, say we were to make changes to Route 4, that is about 40% Title VI populations, that could cause a disparate impact since it is more than 10% of the county percentage as 27%. Disproportionate burden is pretty much that same formula, except it refers to low-income populations. So to give you a kind of a real life example, so we conducted a service equity analysis of all the changes that were approved last month by the board. Shown here are changes to Route 90, 813, 814, and the Central Avenue Trolley. And of the approved service adjustments, the only route that was flagged to cause a potential disparate and adverse impact was the initial recommendation to eliminate Route 90, since the percentage change borne by Title VI populations is about 20% greater than the county as a whole. So in order to mitigate that, we did maintain the route for just about 3/4 of the ridership. And for the eliminated sections, there are service alternatives like the Route 34 and the Sunrunner. And I'll just note, had we had to cut more from the budget, there could have been the potential for additional disparate impacts if we would have had to eliminate service from additional routes, but fortunately we were able to minimize potential impacts. And so with that, the recommendation again is to recommend approval of the Title VI program update, the monitoring results, and the major service change policy for submission to FTA, as well as the service equity analysis for the changes approved last month.
Move approval.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. First off, very snappy, thank you.
Yeah, you did a
Yes,
good job.
we did. You did.
You did a good job.
Do you need two different motions, or we just?
No, we can take them as one action item.
Okay.
So I don't see any other further comment or questions, so we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you so much. That passes unanimously. And on to information items. The community sentiment survey, item 4A. Whitney Fox is not standing up at the front of the room.
He's not.
Good morning, I'm Trish Collins, the Director of Human Resources here, and I have the pleasure of introducing this item. As you know, this item, like all of our other business that we bring before you, relates to our sustainable strategic plan and the three key pillars that are inside it: the healthy workforces and community, economic vitality, and environment. One of the ways that we measure our performance on healthy communities and workforce is by conducting a tri-annual survey of community members who specifically do not ride our services. The main things that we're looking for here are whether community members are familiar with our services, and whether they feel a sense of value outside of riding. So do they value the services that PSTA provides, perhaps from an economic impact standpoint, or reducing traffic, or improving the environment in our community? We enlisted Tampa-based HCP associates to conduct this survey for us, and I'd like to introduce the Vice President of HCP Associates, Robert Allen, who's going to share the results with us.
Thank you so much,
You're
Trish. That's
welcome.
fantastic. As introduced, I'm still Robert Allen. It's nice to meet all of you all. Brad, it's great to see you. I know that we value quickness this morning, so I will go right to it. So this is our 2023 Community Sentiment Study results. This is, as Trish mentioned, designed to capture community sentiment of non-riders, collecting qualitative and quantitative data, trending it against previous studies. So we do try to keep our questions similar so that we can have that long-term data tracking. And of course, as she mentioned, all of its myriad uses for the strategic planning process. So what does that really mean? We collected 1,000 telephonic survey respondents of Pinellas County residents 18 and older from March 9th through April 4th of this year. It was a 19-question survey that on average took approximately 15 minutes for the respondents to complete. All of this data was collected telephonically using a mixture of cell phones and landlines, yielding us a margin of error of 3.1%. So there's a lot here, and I'll be very quick. But first and foremost, overwhelmingly, we want to look at our demographics. We ask demographic questions in order to balance our sample and make sure that our sample is a representative sampling of Pinellas County residents. What you will notice is that we control for what I call our big three: our gender, race, ethnicity, and our age ranges, which means that our sample is perfectly correspondent to the Pinellas County aggregate for those three values. We do not control for income data because it's very difficult to get people to tell us what their income is. We usually get about 20% saying no. In 2023, that was about 16. What we found is that we are a little overrepresented in that sort of middle income hump, the 25 to 75,000 per annum, and we're a little underrepresented in the lowest and the highest income brackets. Now, that does not concern me. This is a very well-balanced sample in terms of our results, because when you account for the fact that this refusal bucket is upwards of 20%, again, it tends to be, when you look at the literature, people in the highest and the lowest income brackets are the ones who are the least inclined to share how much they're making. So this is a fantastic slide that really illustrates that we have a very good sample across Pinellas County. So let's get straight to the awareness factor. So are our non-riders aware of PSTA's services? We asked this question in a couple of different ways, and it's basically designed to give us an aided and an unaided awareness. So unaided awareness is when we say, hey, do you know who operates the buses in Pinellas County? And they go, oh yeah, it's PSTA. That's unaided awareness. That's what we want. We want people to know immediately who you guys are with just the slightest inclination. And then for those who are not as familiar, we follow up with the second question, asking them whether they've heard of PSTA or Pinellas Suncoast Transit Authority. So that's what this chart here on the bottom left illustrates. And I just want to show that blue is the unaided. This is the good number. Aided awareness it's nice, but all that means is we said, hey, do you know PSTA? And they said, yes, I do. So looking at the change from 2018, 2019, where we were at about 80%, the next time we conducted this study, that aided awareness number jumped to 95%, but even more promisingly, the unaided awareness, that unprompted, jumped from 73 to 89%. This is a large increase in brand awareness, and it does speak to the COVID era, 2019 to 2023, we have that big span of time in between then. A lot of what you guys did during COVID clearly resonated with the population. We see unaided awareness levels, again, at about 90%, which is very high for a public transit agency. Let's talk about what do they think about when they think of PSTA. This is probably unsurprising. By the way, I just want to disclaim this right here. We ask, the study is limited to those who do not take PSTA services. That is defined as taking a PSTA service 6 or more times in a year. So we do keep a stat where we ask whether people have ever, even once in passing, used a PSTA service. We do see that about 37% say that they have in some form or fashion. But just to make that very, very clear, we ask at the beginning about whether they take PSTA services more than 6 times in the last year. That is our qualification question. So when we ask, what do you think of when you think of PSTA? Overwhelmingly, people think of bus company, they think of public transit, they'll say the name. And growingly, we've seen some trolley services get featured as kind of the first thing that they mention. You know, they're mentioning the Jolly Trolley, they're mentioning some of the other trolley routes in Pinellas County. We don't see a lot of other comments, and especially, we don't see a lot of negative comments when we first reach people. These are some good signs. When we see how these trends have changed over time, we see that there's, again, the biggest takeaway is that there's an increase of people thinking of PSTA as a trolley operator as compared to a bus operator. And associating it more with public transit has been kind of a steady thing since 2018. So the trolleys are kind of be a little bit of a feature point of this presentation because we see a lot of non-rider interest in the trolley options. So we ask about a series of routes, services, and amenities. I will not keep us and read this whole list, I promise. A couple things I want to point out. First of all, bus service. Everybody knows that PSTA is the bus operator, and you do have to ask these basic questions.
Yeah.
But after that, awareness tends to drop off. We see a series of things that people just tend to associate with being on a bus. So Wi-Fi on the buses, senior citizen reduced fares, disabled citizen reduced fares. People are saying that they've heard of these programs. We always have to remember that when we ask people questions, we have to be careful of how much we believe their answers. I think, do people know exactly what the fare rate is, 75% of the population of Pinellas County? I don't think so. I think they're just assuming that these are things that any bus company offers. Then we get into our trolleys, where we really start to see them feature about 67 to 75% of the sample. Other features don't score nearly so high, more in the 40s and 50% range. Let's look at how this trends over time. I just want to call out a few things. So we see an increase in awareness of the transit app. That's the one that I really want to feature here. 42% to 67%. Now again, does that mean that 67% of the Pinellas County non-rider population has the transit app or even knows where to get it? No. What it does associate is that they either have heard of it or they are expecting that any bus service these days should have that type of service. Let's talk about our trolleys a little bit more in a prettier format than this slide. So, with our trolleys, something that we've been doing since the 19 study is asking the question of our respondents and then segmenting their data based on whether they live close to the trolley route. So the thought process is, if you live nearby, maybe you know a little bit more, you have a differential awareness, and that can help to explain some of our awareness challenges. We see the trolleys are here on the bottom, and then the within 2.5 miles and without 2.5 miles. Our blue bars represent our 2019 data, our teal bars represent our 2023 data, and this is something I really want to drive home. It doesn't matter so much whether you live within or without the trolley range. It does make a difference. So for instance, for the Central Avenue Looper, 50% within the 2.5 mile radius, 39% without in 2019. These numbers have jumped significantly from 2019 to 2023 across the board for all of the trolleys, whether you are within the 2.5 mile radius or whether you are outside of it. We went from 50% to 69%, for instance, within the Central Avenue Looper. We see, on average, it's a 20 to 30% jump in awareness of all of the different trolley routes. Again, this was a pretty flat number from 18 into 19. We see a very large jump across the board here. And the Sunrunner, which of course was not tested in 2019, testing right in the middle of the pack with all of the other more longer running trolley routes. Just to give you kind of an example, this is the Jolly Trolley route. You'll see the teal here represents those that were within that 2.5 mile radius, and here are the respondents that are outside of that. These next two slides are going to help us to drive home a point about what does the community think of when they think of PSTA. And the story here isn't particularly exciting, which you guys can interpret as a good or a bad thing. We ask the residents whether they feel that PSTA and its services cater to all of these different populations on a scale of 1 to 7. What I think you all will notice about this is these numbers look very similar. Pretty much everybody agrees that PSTA caters to some degree, so that halfway point or better. And about 20% of the sample says that PSTA expertly caters to these populations. When you see a distribution that's this even, what this suggests is that the residents don't know. They're just guessing when it comes to these statements. This is a good and a bad thing. Why is it good? Well, if there was an incident involving, let's say, a bike rider and PSTA's buses, and that was a big story in the news, or if there was a dedicated challenge with one of these groups, then you would have a very high likelihood of seeing that reflect in this data negatively. We don't see that. In fact, we see everything kind of at this nice even schmear. We see that with this next slide as well. We ask people to provide 2 different scores. One is how important is it that a public transit agency have this or provide this, and the other is whether they are satisfied with how PSTA is delivering this to the community. Again, I want to illustrate this point here. When I make a radar chart, I don't want to see a perfect circle, because again, it means that we don't have this variation. There's not really a story here where we say, well, residents are very passionate that PSTA helps to alleviate traffic congestion, but they don't think that it's a safe mode of transit. We're not seeing those differentials. So although we see increased awareness of trolley routes, and as we will get to, of the organization itself, we are not seeing a coalescing of public opinion around any of these opinion topics or around whether PSTA is good or bad to a certain group or not. This is not surprising when we consider that we're not talking to people who take the bus. But ultimately, what I perceive this as it's a happy, steady state. There's no bright, shining victories in these last 2 slides, but they do help us to ground ourselves and say, there's no brewing crisis, there's no missed issue here that we have not addressed. And so I view these with a little bit of trepidation in the sense that I wish there was a little more of a story to these, but again, it is a sense of an even operation, a smooth operation. Let's talk about these. We ask about these statements regarding the strategic plan points, whether they feel that PSTA connects people with the places they need to go in the community, providing effective, financially viable public transportation, providing effective Pinellas transportation leadership, and delivering customer-oriented public transit services. We also asked a question about whether we added that PSTA intentionally makes diversity, equity, and inclusion a priority. What we see, we saw really, the bigger story here is what we saw in 2019. We saw a large jump for 3 of the 4 original categories, and that jump has basically receded back to its original levels. We have approximately 2/3 to 3/4 of the population who affirm that these statements of PSTA's strategic plan as something that they are executing on well. It's a very big jump from 2019 to 2023 when we talk about a 4-year study difference. Do I wish that we had seen 86% continued here? Yeah, absolutely. But we are seeing really a regression to the mean for these 4 statements, and this 5th statement that was added really falling in the same range as these others. So we just talked about how residents don't really have any specific opinions on how PSTA is operated, but let's ask them about how they feel the service is valuable to Pinellas County. And what we see here is generally a very good story. It's a little bit mixed, but it's a good story. We see that 95% either agree or strongly agree in 2023 that PSTA delivers a valuable service to residents of Pinellas County. But we also see a moderation of that enthusiasm. So only 25% are willing to say, I strongly agree, and 70% say, I agree. Again, we want to see these numbers be over 85, 90% for the combination of strongly agree and agree, and you're there at 95%. That's great. The opportunities for the future to improve this and to move the needle forward would be really to continue that, to increase that strongly agree bucket. Finally, let's talk about some funding and future points. Do you support the use of tax dollars to improve the county's public transit infrastructure? This question has 95% of endorsement. And that number is basically unchanged from the last time this was asked in 2019. It was 96% then. This suggests durable support for public transportation infrastructure. I want to be very noteworthy about the phrasing. That word infrastructure can carry a lot of things.
Yeah.
And if you were to say to bus routes, you could have gotten a very different question.
Yeah.
And let's look at how that is in terms of the perceptions of overfunding, and this almost might be a blessing and a curse as well. 2023, the picture has basically not changed from 2019, except that a good chunk of people who felt originally that PSTA was underfunded then have shifted their perception into thinking that it's adequately funded. There's still 38%, and this is, if anything, the biggest takeaway, 38%, more than a third, still don't have a clue. They don't even have an opinion on this. This is where you can find the needle to move. The overfunded people, they probably have a little bit of a bone to pick. And the underfunded people that's shrunken. If you seem like you're doing good work with a slimming budget, you're going to have this challenge of people thinking that it's working because you're making it work, even if you really are underfunded. So just as a perception here, let's see, that's 80%, 90% believe that it's either adequately funded or that they are unsure. So just to review in brief, there is a 16% increase from 2019 for residents who can recall the transit organization's name. There is a greater familiarity, more than 16% increase across the board, of all of the trolley branded services provided by PSTA. However, there is a general evenness in terms of their perceptions on whether they treat the different community groups correctly or whether they provide these different amenities and services to the community. There's basically, the data says we don't know, or the people don't know. They don't have a great opinion on that. Generally speaking, other programs and amenities have seen an increase in awareness, and residents were very, very consistent, again, across all of these community characteristics. So there is a little bit of an opportunity for increased messaging to those groups, probably related to the trolleys because that's what they've been hearing about the most, and that's where we've seen the most growth in awareness. I hope that was brief enough for you all. I'd love to take any questions you guys might have.
All right, thank you for that. One quick question I had,
Sir.
and I think you answered it, but the Sunrunner is included in the trolley mix?
It is, yes, sir.
Okay.
That's correct. It was just not, it was only asked about for the first time in the 23 study.
Oh, yeah,
Right.
because the split.
No, yeah, and I understand, it's just, when we even
It
your
doesn't
last-
have the word trolley in
Even
it.
your last point was talking about trolley, so I just wanted to confirm as we're
That's what you
thinking
said.
about this, that it includes the Sunrunner, which obviously is a big piece of our awareness and everything else recently. So,
Yes, sir.
with that, Commissioner Flowers.
Thank you. Way to go on the mixed methodology for this, this studies. And it's very interesting because if you were to ask these same questions of people who actually ride the bus system or take our transit system, it would be very different.
If you give me that contract, I'll do it for you.
Oh, help me, Jesus. Okay,
Go back to
so.
the underfunded part.
Yeah, exactly. That's well. So, what really interests me here is the slide that you have for PSTA delivers value.
Yeah.
What is your reaction to the following statement? PSTA delivers a valuable service to residents in Pinellas County. Comparing that slide to your expectation gaps slide. Those two are,
Yes, ma'am.
those two are very interesting because, and sometimes people just give you an answer because they want to get you off the phone, or whatever, but they've already committed, so they're going to answer it. But I just found those two correlations to be really interesting. And then on your community sentiment slide, which would be your qualitative questions, PSTA connects people with the places they need to go in the community. I find these numbers interesting, even though they have declined, and that says that we probably need to do a little bit more in the marketing arena about where our routes go, taking into account we've had additional businesses and corporations to move into the community, so maybe our routes don't go to those places because they just come, and that's probably where they need to go. But the other part is when we have people communicating with us about service requests, service levels. If you don't ride the bus and if you don't know the structure, how do you adequately answer this question? So while I appreciate that number, and unfortunately it's that 11% decline, I question the number.
So I could not agree with your questioning more. At the end of the day, when you ask people who are not users of a product what they think about a product, all they have is secondhand information. You could argue that a lot of 30% of what we're capturing in a work like this is media perceptions and how well the media has informed the everyday resident of Pinellas County. I do think it's noteworthy that of these three statements that kind of regress back to their 2018 values, what didn't have that bump in 2019? That was providing effective Pinellas transportation leadership. It stayed about the same and didn't actually regress as far back as it did in 2018. These are still not bad numbers, seeing more than half, but it is noteworthy that we saw kind of more of the happy rah-rah statements were trended upwards in 19, and then one that had more to do about transportation leadership stayed flat over that same period of time.
And then my last observation on the trolley familiarity slide, I know how much work PSTA and everyone has put into information about the Sunrunner, so I really thought that number would be higher.
This data is a little old in the sense that it's from March to April of this year. So when all of the stuff in the news, for instance, about the fare changes being in the Times and all that,
Maybe it's gone.
probably would have driven awareness higher, given all of the changes and the discussion around them. This was before all of that. So I would say I would be willing to wager that if we were to repeat this study right now and only ask that question, we would probably see a 10% increase from that, just because it's been covered in the media and there's been a lot of news, not all great, but mostly good, about the Sunrunner. I'll stop there.
Thank you.
On the other hand, I would also add that 6 months of the Sunrunner being in existence,
Right.
compared to a decade plus of the Central Avenue trolley,
Yeah.
these other systems.
So they
The
hear
fact that you're
trolley
able
more.
to capture that much awareness in that short a period of time, I think is awesome.
Anecdotally, I know a lot of people in my age range who are familiar with the Sunrunner, who I did not think would be familiar with PSTA routes and services. So I do think that, again, taking into consideration that early window of the year may help to explain why that was more in line with the rest of the pack.
Very quickly, it looks like familiarity with each of the routes, and you asked about each of the routes, a separate question.
That's correct, yes.
They're all up, so I just wondered why the Sunrunner is listed with trolleys. I mean, it's not a trolley, it's a bus. And so it seems to me that this slide should have maybe a Sunrunner familiarity and then a trolley familiarity.
We actually had 5 separate slides in the original presentation, and we
Okay.
condensed them down for the sake of the
Okay.
presentation.
It's just the categorization on the top of the slide.
Right.
And
I don't think
and
it was
my
actually-
question then is, for any of the ones that combines the trolley awareness into a single number as opposed to individual routes, did you include the Sunrunner at that
We
point? or
don't
not?
have a single trolley awareness statistic.
I think you do.
What slide?
That one?
Are you talking about right here?
Yeah.
So this is actually,
Yeah,
So-
that
so
one.
to-
Does that
it's-
include the Sunrunner?
so this is an open-ended feedback question, so we got free-form responses.
Okay.
If your question is, if somebody mentioned expressly the Sunrunner in this, did we group it in here? My bet is yes. I don't know that off the top of my head. In the full report we provided you all, there should be verbatims for this question, but at minimum, I can follow up with you on whether we
Yeah,
grouped
I
Sunrunner
I
in.
wouldn't think so. How many of you think of the Sunrunner as a trolley service?
No. I don't.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions? Comments? No?
Good job, thank you.
I did actually have one other thing that I thought was interesting to me on slide 9, the community familiarity chart or spreadsheet. The PSTA Access Paratransit, yeah, right there. So those are, when you were asking, have you heard of any of the following programs? Was it PSTA Access or Paratransit, or was it PSTA Access and Paratransit? How is that, do we know how that was phrased?
The interviewer would have read the entire text string.
So PSTA Access Paratransit.
Or, right.
Okay. I will say that, one of the things that I've noticed is going from a 36 or a third of people aware that PSTA provides that service in 2019 to over half. That's a pretty sizable jump. I still think there's work to be done there. But that's also directly, I think, we're tied to the rebranding efforts of PSTA Access in the first place, going from, it used to be people were familiar with Care Ride.
Oh, yeah.
And
With
DART.
vehicles. With
And
vehicles.
they knew it, but especially when we're talking about non-riders, seeing, that rebranding of PSTA Access lets them know, okay, these are other things that our transit tax dollars are going for, and I think that's an interesting jump, given that change.
One thing I wanna keep us in mind at is when we I agree that it's a meaningful jump. We really wanna see brand awareness numbers get above the 60%, 65% mark, in the format of this question to start to make more bold predictions about them. And the reason for that is that at the end of the day, we're going through a list and asking people a yes or no question. And when you are asking people questions, there's a tendency for people to say yes to things that they don't necessarily know, even if it's a faint familiarity. And so I want to just be very, very, very disclaimful to our methodology with that. When you're asking people on the phone, there's this thing called social desirability bias. You don't want to sound stupid to the interviewer. And so when you see a shift from, let's see, 48% to 60%, 59%, 49% to 60%, I think that's a very good, meaningful shift. But before you break that 50% threshold where you could just have people guessing at random, I don't want to make too many assumptions about that. Now, to your point again, that jump I think is meaningful. But in terms of planning purposes, I'd love to see this number jump to 60% next time around. It's not as big of a jump, but it is pushing us away from that 50-50 split point.
And I absolutely agree. I would also argue that bias was there in the prior round of
Oh, yeah,
questioning.
absolutely,
So it existed.
absolutely.
So it's already baked into.
It is baked in.
To the methodology. So, but very eye-opening. I appreciate it. Any additional questions, comments? No? Thank you so much.
We're a public transportation company, not a bus company. And what this is showing is that folks are increasingly appreciating that. And that ought to be part of our ongoing branding, is that things like the like the access are services that will provide service to folks that don't traditionally take the bus.
Right.
It is also disheartening to be shown as that we're overfunded because we do a good job.
Yeah,
of what we have. Like, so,
Standard operating procedure.
yeah, it's like getting an A and be like, but it was only a 90. You could have gotten a 99. It's still an
To me,
A.
it's a compliment though, because people are looking at our bus service, they aren't old and decrepit, they're nice, everything looks good, clean, so.
Yeah, I agree, and I think the Sunrunner has a big piece of that,
Yeah.
as well as our new electric buses play into that.
I mean, like what he said, he calling us old on the sly. People my age. But I think that's what we want. We want people to start looking at us as a total transportation system and not just a bus service. So that says to me, we are doing what we wanted to do in that.
That's why I asked about aerial gondolas on the last thing.
Well, we did talk about gondolas, downtown St. Pete, we decided that no, but,
The next item is the community bus plan update. Jacob, are you back for that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, right. Oh, there it is. Alrighty. All right, hello again. So we are I'm here joined with Ricky from Jared Walker and Associates. So we wanted to give you an update at where we're at in the process with the community bus plan, particularly some of the next steps as we think about some of the choices that we'll have to make as an agency regarding future transit choices. So I know he'll do his best to keep it snappy, but there is admittedly a lot of material to go through. So I'm going to go ahead and transition it to you, Ricky.
he can't do the 30
All right,
slides,
thank you very
so
much,
he's
Jacob.
still-
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, great. Well, like Jacob said, my name is Ricky Ngata, and I am with the consulting team. You can go to the next slide. And so I work with Jared Walker and Associates. And so who we are, what do we do, why am I here talking to you all today? Well, we focus specifically on helping different communities think about their bus networks and think about possible changes. So we evaluate existing networks and we advise on network changes. But throughout our process, we always really focus on our mission, which is that we foster clear that can lead confident decisions. It is not our job to necessarily tell you what to do, but it's our job to make your options clear and to combine our transit network design expertise with your community expertise to be able to come up with the best plan possible. Next. So what is the community bus plan? The community bus plan is a 10-year plan to think about how PSTA can change. And so what we have already done is that we assess the current market needs for transit services, and we are in the process right now of engaging the public in key trade-off questions that I'm going to go through a little later. And then from there, we'll be developing recommendations in the short term and the long term. How are we going to do this? This project is going to be a conversation. You can see these pink faces are technical work faces, the green are reports, and the blue are community engagement. So we already analyzed the existing system. We put it all in a report that we call the choices report because it's not just existing conditions, it talks about key choices. And we are now starting this public engagement phase. Next, so let's think a little bit about transit and what makes transit useful. Imagine a person, her name is Jane. Next, Jane lives in a city that is full of many possible destinations. Next, if we look at the transit network, we can draw this bubble that shows where Jane can get to in a reasonable amount of time, where she can get to in 45 minutes using transit. Next. Now, if we overlay this on top of the city, then we can calculate all of the jobs and opportunities that Jane can reach in a reasonable amount of time. This is what we call access. It is her access to opportunities, access to all of the richness that the city and the county has to offer. Next. And so we have done this analysis throughout Pinellas County using the PSTA bus network, and we have been able to measure where people can get to in a reasonable amount of time from different places throughout the county. So these are 3 examples from downtown St. Petersburg, downtown Clearwater, and Terrence. We've done this everywhere in the county, and we can quantify from each of these points how many people and jobs you can reach in 30, 45, and 60 minutes using transit and walking. If we want to think about making transit more useful, what you want to do is make these bubbles bigger. And you can do that by modifying the transit network. Next. And in doing so, you would follow this recipe. This recipe shows how you can make these bubbles bigger, which means that you would be making the transit network more useful. You would be making people freer to do more things and reach more opportunities, and therefore you would get more ridership. So what you would do is to create high-frequency lines that form a connected network that are reasonably fast and reliable, and that focus on transit-friendly places. I'm going to go through each of these. I'm going to move this over to the right. So next and next. So the first one is high frequency lines. Frequency is extremely important when we're thinking about transit, and it's something that a lot of people that don't use transit every day don't realize because you don't have a lot of similar experiences in day-to-day life. But frequency is very important because it does 3 independent things. It reduces waiting time. It makes connections really easy because when 2 frequent lines are crossing, it's very easy to transfer from one to the other and reach more of the network, not just the one route that you're on. And it improves reliability because if a bus breaks down, there's another one coming soon. And so when you have higher frequency, you tend to get high ridership, but not just high total ridership, more ridership per unit of service. Providing frequency is expensive, but you get more ridership per unit of service, per service hour. Next. And we can look at that in the PSTA bus network. On the right is a map that we made of your bus network where the frequencies are shown by colors. So the red routes are routes that come every 15 minutes or better. The purple come every 20 minutes, the blue every 30, the green every 60. And then the graph on the left shows on the bottom axis, on the x-axis, the frequency. So the further you go left, the more frequent a route is. And when you go up, that shows productivity. So what is the ridership per service hour? And so you can see in general that the higher frequency services that you have tend to get higher ridership. If you look at the 30-minute services, on average, those are more productive than your 60-minute services. So we see this trend in the data. Higher frequency gets you higher ridership because it's more useful to more people. Next. Connections. So in transit works really well in grids. And if you provide a grid of frequent routes, then it's very easy for people to move around the entire network with just one simple transfer where they don't have to wait a long time. Your county is laid out in a grid, but your service is not frequent. And so people would still have to wait a long time to transfer. And when you don't have frequent service, there is another option. Next. And that is to focus on time transfers, also called pulses, where you make many routes come to one key location where they can wait 5 minutes, people can transfer from one route to the other, and then the bus routes go. And in that time, you reduce the transfer down to 5 minutes. So you can schedule routes so that they meet at specific places, at transit centers, and people can transfer easily. Next. Throughout your county, you have many different transit centers, but you don't have any timed transfers. So this is something that can be improved in your system. It's a little tricky to work with the timing, so that this might require thinking about new locations for transit centers. But if you're able to time these, the time between these transfer centers, then you might be able to do time transfers and people can reach more of the network easily. Next. Fast and reliable. So in transit, so this brings us to bus stop spacing. Your system right now has very close bus stop spacing. The bus stops are spaced really close together. And that means that buses have to continually be slowing down, going to the bus stop, speeding up, slowing down, going to the bus stop. And so buses tend to be pretty slow. They can't travel very far because of how much they're stopping. If you have bus stop spacing that's a little farther apart, then buses can be faster and more reliable. But there is a trade-off because if they're spaced farther apart, that also means people might have to walk a little more to get to a bus stop. But your current average space between stops is 900 feet, which is very, very close. Best practice tends to be a little more like 1,500 feet. So that's also a key question to consider. Next. And if you want transit to do well, then you want to focus it on transit-friendly places. Those are places that are dense, walkable, linear, and proximate. Next. So density is important because if you have these two bus routes that are exactly the same number of buses, same frequency, same length, but the one on the top has double the number of houses, the one on the top has double the number of potential riders. Without knowing anything about the people that live here, what their preferences are, just because of the density, the one on the top can possibly have more riders. Next. Walkability, in the left, if you imagine those circles are a quarter mile from the center, and there's a bus stop at the center, the shaded streets show where you can walk a quarter mile to get to that bus stop. In a connected street network, you can reach the bus stop from almost everywhere. But in a disconnected suburban network, like on the bottom, you can't reach it from everywhere. If you live just south and east of that stop, you might have to walk really far to get there. So street connectivity is important for walkability. And it's also important that you're able to cross this street because transit works both ways. So if it's not safe to cross the street, then you can take the bus to the grocery store, but you can't take the bus from the grocery store. Next. And linearity, it's important that transit runs in straight lines. If you have the development patterns, things laid out on a line, it's very easy to provide one line of transit. But if you have offset destinations, like going down a cul-de-sac, taking a tour of a Walmart parking lot, going over to an island and then back, then the route meanders a lot and it discourages ridership because people that are going from one end to the other have to deviate to all these places and discourages people from using the service. Next. So those are the things that you would do if you want high ridership. We're not saying that you should want high ridership. So that brings us to the ridership coverage trade-off. Within a fixed number of resources, this trade-off is unavoidable. So let me explain it by using this fictional town. Next. In here, the lines are streets and the dots are people and jobs. If you want to design a very high transit network following everything that we said, next, we would design the network like this, where you have two routes on the two main streets that have most service. And because you only have two routes and you put all the buses in here, it means that buses are coming very frequently. So people don't have to wait a long time. In here, you would be maximizing ridership because you have really good service where most people live. But you don't reach everywhere. So in the bottom right here, there's an empty area where Mrs. Jones lives, and Mrs. Jones doesn't have any transit close to her. If you care about providing service to Mrs. Jones and everybody else in the county, you might want to provide coverage. Next. And if you were to do that, you would spread the service out like this. When you spread the service out, instead of 2 bus routes, you now have 10. And so instead of buses coming every 10 or 15 minutes, now they come every 60, which means that even though you go everywhere, people have to wait a long time, and it is not very useful to a lot of people. So you would not expect to get high ridership from a coverage network like this, but that's okay, because your goal is not to get high ridership, it's to provide coverage, to provide some service to everyone. Next. So both of these have very important goals that I'm sure that you all hear a lot about. Under the ridership goals, you'd be more thinking like a business. you would get lower subsidy per passenger, you would support dense and walkable development, and because a lot of people are riding transit, this supports all of the sustainability goals. On a coverage goal, you're providing some service to a lot of people, so that's be more thinking access for all. It supports suburban low-density development, lifeline access, and just reaching as many people as you can. Next. So the good thing is that you don't have to pick one or the other. This is a spectrum, but within a fixed budget, the more you do of one, the less you do of the other. And this is the biggest question throughout this project. Ridership and coverage, and where should you land? Today, you allocate about 60% of your resources towards ridership goals and about 35% of your resources towards coverage goals. There's about 5% of duplication in the system when routes are on the same streets and they're not really adding or subtracting to ridership or to coverage. But your general splits is 60% ridership, 35% coverage. And so that's a key question that's coming out of this study. Next. Another key question is to think about walking versus waiting, which is another way to look at ridership and coverage. If you look on the left, if you have two 60-minute routes, you might only have to walk a little bit to get to a bus stop. But when you get there, you have to wait a long time because a route is coming every 60 minutes. If you combine services like on the right and you only have one bus coming every 30 minutes, you might have to walk longer to get to the bus stop. But once you get there, you have to wait less. So on total, you often wait less total time. But that's a trade-off, walking versus waiting. Next. And so these key questions, ridership coverage, walking versus waiting, and the bus stop spacing question that I talked about before are things that we're bringing to the public in this public engagement phase. And we're also asking the community, asking you all to get your input on all of this. Next. And so in this next public engagement phase that we're going to be starting very soon, we already had a stakeholder workshop this month. I'm presenting to the boards today and to the full board next week. And then we're going to have public meetings in November and December. And then in January, I'm going to be coming back to the full board to be bringing the results from the public and asking on a decision between ridership and coverage that's going to guide the draft plan for the future. And that's it. That was very quick, so I'm happy to take any questions if you all still have time. Thank you for listening.
All right, thank you for that. Commissioner Oliver, I know you had to leave at noon. Do you have any?
I handle it by phone. I'm okay till 12:30 now.
Okay.
I'm good. Thank you.
Questions, comments, thoughts?
I've got a question.
No?
This is a phenomenal amount of information. Has staff been able to digest it and look at issues like the many transfer centers, no time transfers, and the bus stop spacing? Is that something you do annually anyway, or is this something that's going to prompt you to have further analysis on those specific points? When I rode 58, for example, I noticed that there were a number of stops, most of the stops, that nobody got on or off. And I wondered, is that an analysis that's done annually, where you look at the number of people that get on it? Because they are pretty close together in some cases.
Yeah, and in part, one of the tools that the consultant has developed for this project actually is a bus stop spacing tool that really easily shows us in a graphic way on a map where there's larger stop spacing and where there's really tight stop spacing. So I guess there's sometimes a debate about, do you remove low ridership routes or do you leave them there just in case somebody not routes, stops, or do you leave them there just in case someone may need it?
Okay.
And with what I would just add to what Heather said, the questions that he just outlined about stop spacing, about frequency, about coverage core, those are more like policy kinds of issues about your bus system, that, as he said, we've done this big survey of the riders that's informing this. Now we're doing this community outreach. We've had one stakeholder workshop. We're going to have more. And then, so at least my thought is that next month, the planning committee is going to see some of the survey results that are being tabulated right now. And then hopefully in January, we will have Rachel's going to send you guys an invite to our doodle poll for a workshop on all this stuff. And then you'll have the survey information, the board will have the survey information, and some of the community input to kind of coalesce around.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. So with the consultant team, we are probably going to be releasing in the next week a survey that kind of highlights some of these key trade-off and policy questions, so we can kind of take the temperature of how the community feels, one way or the other about these various questions about how you would plan and design transit services.
Thank you. I actually had a couple of thoughts that I'm interested to see what comes out of the next phase. And it's around walking versus waiting. So one, I don't know if there's just a psychological difference from a consumer standpoint of 60 minutes of waiting or 60 minutes of walking, right? If they were the same amount, like I know you watch people who are stuck in traffic and they bolt out of traffic and drive like 80 miles out of the way, going, but they feel like they're moving, right? So they don't, it may have actually taken longer to get where they were going, but they felt like they were moving. I don't know if we have that same phenomenon when we're talking about waiting for a bus or moving to the bus. So that's an interesting dynamic that I'd be interested to see if there is an actual difference. Commissioner Flowers and I had mentioned the single, waiting for a bus if it's your single route isn't as bad if you have an app that tells you when that bus is going to be there, right? If the bus stop's 5 minutes away, the bus is 10 minutes away. So you're not waiting 60 minutes, you're waiting 10, 5 walk, 5 get up to wait. But that becomes a completely different story when your bus is connecting to another bus. And so you're being dropped off and then waiting for the next bus that's 60 minutes later. So how you look at waiting versus walking, or that waiting dynamic is different, whether it's a single route ride or a connected route ride. And so I'd be interested to see how that plays out, especially from when talking to the actual riders.
If I can add something,
Please.
I'll say that with the waiting consideration, a lot of times we think about just waiting for the bus to get there, but a lot of time the frequency also affects us waiting, whether it's at the beginning or at the end of the trip, just waiting not where we want to be. So a lot of service workers might have to go into job at a very specific time. If someone has to clock in at McDonald's at 9 in the morning, but the bus can only get them there at 8:20 or 9:20, they have to choose whether being at work 20 minutes late or 40 minutes early. So even though they might not have to wait a long time at the beginning of their trip and they can look at the app, they have to get to work 40 minutes early for their shift to start. So waiting isn't necessarily just the bus, but the frequency also affects waiting where you don't want to be.
Well, and that's a fantastic point. We've heard that feedback from riders as well, who have to, especially on the hour waits. So I guess it's just a lot of how you look at this. It's very dynamic and affects different segments of our ridership in different ways. Commissioner Down?
Thank you very much. I attended the workshop and I thought it was wonderful. Highly recommend it to everybody. It really makes you think at the ridership level and frequency and how you build it. It was kind of a SimCity type of approach for the bus system. It was pretty cool. Also, when you consider walking, we've all kind of touched on it, but you have to enjoy where you're walking or where you're waiting. And the idea of the reason people don't walk on 19 is because there's no place to go, but it's just an ugly place to walk. So even if you had a place to go on US 19, you rarely would do that. So it's also the environment where you are. One of the things that I thought was missing from the workshop and that SimCity type of thing we were dealing with, and the whole thing was even discussed today, was living in the community. And so we didn't really touch on tourism, or those that are here for 3 months out of the year versus those that live here year-round. And how can we work to create that public transit system that gets cars off our beaches, that eliminates the need to rent a car once you get to Tampa Airport, right? We talk about it all the time, we're the most populated county in the state. And so we get it, at least in Dunedin, all the time, by you're overdeveloping Dunedin. But actually the population of Dunedin has really changed. It ebbs and flows like every community, but there really hasn't been an impact from any new development. And so what the residents are really complaining about is the increase in car traffic, the increase in volume. And so if we can somehow work to eliminate that, that will eliminate the concept of overdeveloping. So I don't know how you can add tourism into this. I don't know how you can add frequency into it to help alleviate that, but that will go a long way. That will also allow us, for any of these workshops, are we asking St. Pete Clearwater, Visit St. Pete Clearwater, to be part of this? The Tourist Development Board, are we asking them to be involved in that? So that at least gets their perspective into it. How can we get people from the airport to the hotel to other hotels, hotels to museums, to beaches, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, absolutely. So I know over the next few months, in addition to a few larger public meetings, we're definitely looking to attend a lot of different community events and try to have as many touch points throughout the community as possible. And I believe Visit St. Pete Clearwater, we have a long list of organizations that we want to touch base with as part of this process, and they're certainly included with that. I know in the long term, we definitely are interested in adding more service to the airport, to your point of, making sure that we're, addressing both tourist needs as well as maybe workers trying to commute to and from the airport and across the bay. And I think in the meantime, though, something we can look at regarding tourist information is as part of the onboard survey data that we'll present on more next month, I think we'll really be able to narrow down, and I think, we can make some assumptions, like we know the trolley routes likely have more tourists, but we can, create a better and more current ridership profile of who our tourists are and which services they're riding, so we can, help inform our transit planning and marketing needs for those individuals.
All right. Any additional comments, questions? None? Thank you so much. We appreciate the presentation, and I know we're going to hear more soon. Is there any other business from committee members? All right, seeing none, we will adjourn, and see you all at the board meeting in next week, 2 weeks, sometime in the future.
Next week. Next week.
And I do apologize for
We're gonna take a photo at the board meeting.
Sometimes it's just best to get it all out,
And that is kind of my thought.
And I thought it was fruitful discussion. I mean, I was listening and sitting back there, but I thought your discussions, they were good questions. I don't mind waiting.